Who was Augustus Caesar? Although we generally think of Augustus Caesar in terms of his appearance in the Bible, or perhaps his bringing about of the Pax Romana, as the adopted son of Julius Caesar, he built on his father's legacy and genius and established himself as one of the most brilliant politicians in history. He did this in three ways. Through his, he was in three ways. He was ruthless, He was ruthless, and he became more conservative, and he was a master propagandist. Point 1. Augustus Caesar's ruthlessness. So, for many people in this time that supported Julius Caesar, his death and betrayal was a lot like the death of Jesus for many Christians. So, for example, in both, the sun set at 6 p.m., which is early, during the time of their death. There are stories about a comet appearing for 7 nights after Caesar's death. Supposedly, after he died, Caesar appeared to Brutus and told him that he would essentially die soon. And so all this goes to show that Caesar was kind of thought of like a god. And many of these stories would also set up the climate for Jesus to come. And it would show him as being somewhat like a god as well when he did many of these same things. So this just goes to show the magnitude of Caesar's death. And it was kind of also, it's supposed to be like a very transformative moment in Roman history. Augustus Caesar and the other followers of Caesar learned a lot from him during his lifetime. But also they became much more ruthless because of his death. So, kind of the idea is he was a great ruler. He got a lot done, very charismatic. But the reason it didn't last was because he was too kind to people who would end up killing him. And so they learned this from him as a result of his death to be more ruthless in politics. Julius Caesar had actually set up a poison pill in his will. So that's like if a company has a poison pill, it's kind of like a something set up to hurt people who, take control. So, for example, in a company, if someone buys a lot of the stock that they don't want to do this, there will be something in the bylaws that will essentially dissolve the company. So it's kind of like an emergency, final attack type thing. So he set one up, and it was that he would give $14,000 to each Roman citizen out of his own personal money. So a lot of the people who killed him might try and paint him as this evil monarch, oh, it's okay, we killed him for you. Don't worry about it. He was gonna take control of you. But now what he did by putting this in his will is that he made them all look really bad, because it made them look like they just killed this sweet old man who wanted to give everyone money. When he died in his will, he also adopted Augustus and changed his name to Octavian. So in this time, children were essentially seen as a continuation of the person of the father. And this is also why many times they would take on the name of the father. The way that names worked in that time is you would have kind of 4 names. You would have a personal name, a clan name essentially, so that would be Caesar. You would have a nickname, which would be kind of not so much a nickname as it is a name that is based on some part of your character, and an honorary title. And this was actually Augustus was an honorary title. So he took the name Augustus and Caesar, and he got a lot of Julius Caesar's money. But also what came with this was he had to avenge his death, because like I said, it was thought of that he was essentially a continuation of Julius Caesar once he became adopted. So he formed a triumvirate with two other powerful men for the purpose of, just for the purpose of getting revenge on the people who killed Caesar, and basically use his power uninhibited and just completely any and all power that he could use, he did to hunt down these the people who killed him. He actually once sacrificed 300 knights to his father. His father had a temple, which was interesting. He also plucked out the eyes of a guy just for supposedly having a sword under his toga. So, the story goes like he'd be walking down the street and a guy was there, like coming to meet with him maybe. And he thought he saw a sword, so he had his men like grab him, and then he made him try to admit to, I think he tortured him to try and get him to admit to trying to kill him. And when he didn't say anything, he sentenced him to death only after he had personally plucked out his eyes. So that just shows kind of his ruthlessness. And it also shows kind of the paranoia that came with the death of Julius Caesar, along with the ruthlessness. So Mark Antony and Cleopatra fought Augustus for power at one point. And this is also a good demonstration of his ruthlessness. So they went out to battle, and he had them surrounded with a bunch of boats. And they were in the middle. They were with their army in the middle. And they kind of like charged and like broke through the wall and just sailed out of there. They're like, see ya, peace. And they went to Egypt. There, Augustus went, and he kind of came out to their palace. And he's like, all right, one way out of this. You commit suicide right now. And so essentially, they were in there and they had no other choice. It was a pretty brutal thing to do. Cleopatra told Mark Antony, like, okay, let's do this in private. I don't want to see you die or whatever. So she leaves and he's just sitting there like, I need to kill myself now. But he doesn't want to. So there's a slave standing there and he's like, hey, you, stab me real quick, would you? And he's like, nah, I'm not going to do that, because if you killed him, then he would probably be brutally killed, because you're not supposed to, kill a leader or whatever. So the slave just kills himself right there, because he's basically in a catch-22. Either he kills this leader and gets punished for it, or he doesn't and gets punished for it. So Mark's like, okay, at this point, I just got to kill myself. So he grabs his sword and he like puts it into himself, but he's not very he doesn't commit to it. And only goes like part of the way in. And he like pulls it out like, all right, time to die, and just lays down like, hopefully that'll do it. He wakes up, and to his dismay, the wound is already like scabbing, healing a little bit. And well, now he's got to stab himself again. So he asks, there's new people in the room now. He's like, hey, would you kill me, please? And one of them accidentally let slip that Cleopatra wouldn't like that if they killed him. And so he's like, what? She's alive? And so he's got like this big wound. He like drags himself out of bed and drags himself all the way, across. I mean, they have this huge building. Her chamber's probably far away, probably leaving like a trail of blood or something. And when he gets there, she has a little dumbwaiter pulley type thing, because her bed's like 20 feet tall, to get stuff onto her bed. And so he pulls himself into it and pulls himself up and kind of spills onto her bed. And she's sitting there perfectly fine. And there he dies. So Cleopatra apparently had decided not to commit suicide. She kind of betrayed him in that sense. But I don't know, perhaps she thought she could gain favor with Augustus. But later after this, Augustus actually went and killed all of the children of Julius Caesar that had been the children of Cleopatra as well. He said, quote, "There can only be one son of Caesar," unquote. So all of this, the ruthless way he avenged his father's death, his kind of his paranoia, and his the way he hunted down Antony and Cleopatra goes to show the ruthlessness that he kind of learned the hard way from the death of Julius. So point 2, he became more conservative. So he kind of wanted to change the public image of himself, or he wanted to step away from kind of the violence associated with him. So he started to become more conservative. And this is probably around the time of the Pax Romana, a little bit later, but that comes later. So he starts to kind of rebuild Rome and kind of restore it as well, and shifts to kind of a more conservative, older Roman morality, which is about working for the common good of Rome, and basically you can do what you want as long as it furthers Rome, similar to how Romulus killed Remus, but in the end it didn't really matter because that was how Rome was founded. So, this is also predicated on the idea of, selfless duty and, living humbly and things like this. So in this time, one of the things he changed is there were a lot of the marriage laws weren't very good. There was a lot of loopholes for adultery and things like that. And so he increased the penalty for bachelors and couples without kids. So this seems kind of cruel, but it is very practical, again, for the end goal of furthering Rome. Julia, his daughter, actually broke his laws and committed adultery, and this made him look really bad. This is embarrassing. He said, quote, "I wish I didn't have a wife and that I died childless," unquote. So it was a big deal to him, clearly, because he felt so strongly on this. He also kind of changed the religion a bit. A lot of people had lost faith, so many wars and things going on, a lot less, religious ceremonies being done and things. So in this time of peace, he thought he would kind of bring that back. So he built and repaired many temples. He made many games to honor the god. He brought back a Lupercal celebration in February. So this was a day celebrated by shepherds. And it was probably one of the oldest forms of Valentine's Day, actually. And it had to do with, I believe, Faustulus, the shepherd who found Romulus and Remus. And so what men would do on this day is they would wear loincloths, and they would sacrifice dogs and spread the blood on themselves. Then wipe it with wool or something, stick wool to themselves. And then they would run around and whip women. So the more times the women got whipped, supposedly the more children they'd have. So a lot of people had thought this festival was kind of low and a little crude, perhaps. And so he kind of brought it back as, a strong show of faith. He also made himself the high priest of Rome, which is, he's just wow, I'm so pious that I could actually make myself the high priest. Doesn't really prove much, but he wanted to make a good image of himself. This is the role that likely the Pope developed out of, interestingly enough. And he would later also be thought of as a god because he was supposedly seen ascending to heaven after his death, much like the tales around Julius Caesar's death made him thought of as a god. So finally, he was a master propagandist. He tried to live simple, and he called himself the first citizen rather than emperor or king or something. He always only wore clothing made by women in his family, his nieces, nephews, daughters, sisters, with an exception for rare occasions. He tried to make plain food choices. he ate mostly, plain bread, cheese, with a little bit of fish. And he lived in a small house that was more of a peasant house with plain furniture. And he also did many projects and things with his cash, like he would build, big temples, or build, add stuff to the forums and things. All of this. Oh, and he also used a lot of marble in these projects. He said that, quote, "I found a city of bricks and left it a city of marble," unquote. So all this was to kind of shape his image in the same way that a lot of, politicians today will try and show themselves as like, oh, I'm a man of the people. That's really what he was doing here. He was, trying to eat normally, dress normally, live in like a kind of an average house, and really just to get people to like think of him not as like some elitist, but as like a more regular person. And that was kind of the narrative he was building around himself, to make himself more popular. So, although when we think of Augustus Caesar, we mainly think of his appearance in the Bible, in having the census, or his bringing about of the Pax Romana, as the adopted son of Julius Caesar, he built on his legacy and genius to establish himself as a highly important and one of the most brilliant politicians in history. Thank you. Sorry about the length again. I know this one's a little shorter, so hopefully it's better.